It was the BBE Sonic Maximiser plugin. It sounds impressive, like when you put it on.
So you put on
so
everything?
I just put on everything, right? You know.
I want to maximize everything.
Yeah. Who's out here minimizing? Like, Sonic Maximizer. You want the Sonics maxed. It's simple.
We would like to acknowledge that we are on stolen Yuggera and Turrbal lands, and as settlers of colour, we reflect upon the damaging legacy of colonisation. Always was, always will be.
My name is Niyi Adepoyibi. I create sound, and that's in sort of any capacity, like across music, through the media, sort of anything that can be heard, I can have something to do with it, particularly in its recorded format. Yeah.
Nice.
That's me for creating and facilitating creation of sound by others, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always interested in folks of migrant background having creative careers modeled to them. In myself, I was lucky to have, my mum was a music teacher, and so that was directly modeled and like working from home and the kind of flexibility around that and, you know, kind of managing clients. And I was sort of like, got to see all that kind of stuff growing up. So it wasn't the typical migrant or South Asian thing of like, you know, the doctor, lawyer, engineer.
What time are you becoming a doctor?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So I'm curious, how was that modeled in your household when you were growing up?
Okay, so this is interesting, right? So in my immediate family, you know, so my immediate family, we ended up in Australia.
Yeah.
We're Nigerian, Yoruba. Everyone else is in Nigeria, or some of my extended family moved to other parts of the world as well. But so in Australia, growing up, I really just had my immediate family, which wasn't musical, seemingly wasn't overly musical or arty, I guess. Okay, no, that's not quite true. There was always music.
Few exceptions. Okay.
Yeah, like there was general music.
Right.
Parents were always singing, dancing and stuff, but it wasn't like go and be a musician
Okay.
at all. It was more the kind of more cliche sort of academic, like, you know, excellence is sort of number one priority.
Yeah.
Yeah, there definitely wasn't like a go and be an artist or musician thing. In fact, hilariously, just on the sort of cliche of, you know, migrant background, sort of academic push, right?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, so my whole family's quite academic. And when I was a kid, my dad, this is like at a really young age, like in primary school, at the end of the school year, or even mid-year, like when you had the sort of 6-week holiday or whatever it is, he would buy me like the textbooks for the next year. So like when I'm finishing grade 2, he would get me like grade 3 maths, grade 3, like all the stuff, and like make me do it in the Christmas holidays.
Whoa. Okay. Yeah.
So that I was going into a new school year, like having already done all of the work.
Right.
And then, but that got weird because it started like accumulating because I'd be like, then I was a couple of years ahead. So I remember I think I was going into grade 4.
Yeah.
And like I had done grade 7 maths. What? And I was just like, I got 3 years now until I can do what I just did.
Right. You know? Does that have like some kind of like counterintuitive effect? Like, are you just like really disengaged in class? Like what?
I reckon later on I got like, oh, you know what? Now that you've said that, that's just made me think. I think it might have been later on where probably I got maybe some version of bored. So I just had to find stuff that I found interesting. And possibly that's how I sort of found like sound and music and stuff, because it was just something else.
Right.
I don't know, that's just like, that just clicked when you said that.
Yeah.
So going to have to dig through my mind and be like, is that what happened?
Right, right. This so like the academic side of your mind was kind of like, oh yeah, all this stuff's easy, this school stuff's easy, like
Yeah, basically.
but this sound thing, let me figure that out.
Yeah, like from a young age, like, yeah, I think that's what happened. Now that I'm just unwrapping that now.
Yeah.
Because even going back really early, like before that story I just told you of getting the textbooks for the next year.
Yeah.
At a mega young age, my parents taught me to read.
Okay.
And I didn't know that was unusual until we had moved from, where were we living? Probably, we lived on Groot Island for a while and moved to Darwin.
Right.
And I remember going to like a new school, it's like the new kid in like grade 1 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And, the teacher gets out this book that's like the cat sat on the mat.
Yeah.
And all the kids are like, and I'm just like, what? This is, I'm reading books here. Like, what have you kids been doing for the last 5 years?
Right. Okay.
So anyway.
I feel like I find that in Sri Lanka, in South Asian education as well, like there's a bit of pressure at those ages, and perhaps in the Western model, they're sort of on the back foot a little bit about pushing. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess going through didn't quite have like, modeling or steps to follow to enter the arts. But I would later find, when did I find that? So I picked up guitar initially, like that was the first probably instrument I started really trying to play.
Right.
And when I was maybe 13, and I just went like, I was practicing a lot, like serious practice. And I noticed like my mom, she didn't say anything. I could tell she had some issue with it. And I didn't really know what it was. But it wasn't like don't play guitar or something. It was more like, just she'd be like, don't you think you've played, like, you've been playing that for ages? Like, what? And I would just be like, yeah, I've already done my homework. Like, what's the, like,
yeah.
Like I cruised through that homework. What, what's the issue?
Right.
And then later I found, like around that time, I'd sort of ask other people in my family, oh, what's the deal with this? That actually a lot of my extended family is musicians and everything.
Okay.
And my mom's older brother, when she was young, right, it was kind of at a time in Nigeria where like the concept of being like a professional musician or more like a professional musician who's in a band and touring, and that was sort of newish. And so her brother was doing that, and he kind of maybe departed from the more sensible life of becoming a whatever, and was just touring and partying, and his life consisted of touring and partying and like, women and
yeah, okay.
So
that's what she was saying.
I think she was like, oh no, guitar. Like I'm hearing that sound that my brother used to like. This can't be good.
Right. So she's got this pathway programmed in her mind about what that means for you.
Yeah. But eventually, I was never like discouraged from it or anything, but it was, I didn't have a clear model within my family of pursuing that pathway. It was like, I guess, everyone was sort of academic or became academic or, and went down more conventional pathways, I guess.
Right.
That said, my siblings have all done lots of different things.
Okay.
In creative realms as well. So,
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me about that family and your journey to Australia. Like at what point was that?
Yeah. So let's see. I know my dad, so my parents got together in Nigeria, and my dad left before my mum. And there's a couple of gaps in the story where I've been meaning to like go back and be like, hang on, what was what was happening at this period of time. Because I believe my dad had been to Australia at some point before moving here.
Right.
Like just briefly.
Yeah.
But
A little scout visit.
yes, some recon.
Yeah. My family did that as well. Yeah.
Right, yeah. And eventually sort of, pretty sort of post sort of like, not long post White Australia policy, like, not long after it was possible to sort of move.
Yeah.
He moved, and then my mum came and joined. And I have one of my siblings is born in Nigeria, and then the rest, then were sort of born in Australia. And it was interesting talking, I always loved talking to my parents just about, I guess, the early sort of moments, early times in that period, because we lived in lots of different places, like mostly regional.
Yeah.
There's, one day I've got to go and like, write this all down, because there's places we lived that I didn't even like remember and know, and, like living in communities, living just super remote.
Yeah.
Before eventually moving to the big city, Darwin.
Of all 100,000, 200,000 people, depending on when you were there. Yeah.
Like it was pretty tough, like just that sort of, early period of, I guess, my parents being in Australia. And
yeah, what was the first port of call? Like, where did you land?
I think,
was it all Northern Territory, WA kind of side, or
no? I think when my parents like first moved here, I think it may have been New South Wales somewhere. I know they lived, before I was born, they lived in Wagga for a while, but I'm not sure if that was the very first place. I know there was a bit of New South Wales around, and then Northern Territory, and then basically primarily there.
And what decade was this? What time period for context of migration? So you're saying a bit after White Australia policy, so
I think
80s?
Yeah, I think they
70s, 80s?
Very late 70s.
Very late 70s.
I think I'm going to say like 79.
Right.
Or thereabouts. And, so not I guess the whole thing of moving without sort of a support network.
Of,
of other people who have had your exact sort of journeys as well,
Yeah.
And just like that challenge of like being like, all right, okay, a lot of people don't like us. That's, that's all right. Let's navigate that and, just find, connect with cool people essentially. And, and there's lots of people that sort of help my parents out as well.
Right.
Just in terms of navigating.
Okay.
Navigating things. Yeah.
Right. It's a bit of a pioneer family, because when I think of my parents doing their scout, they were going like all of my dad's side and his parents sort of moved within 5 years or so for each other, and I think of each other, and I think they were able to sponsor each other, that sort of thing. But as opposed to in recent years and decades where regional settlement has been encouraged or mandated for recent migrants, I'm not familiar with that being the case back in 70s and 80s. Like, what attracted your family to regional areas?
Yeah. Probably, I think it would have been, whether it was a specific attraction or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But the early work my dad was doing, like, so when he came, my parents came straight, my dad was actually a mechanic, which is bizarre. Like, he actually became like an academic in Australia, but was just a mechanic and then I think, not long after, was like, for whatever reason, don't really want to do that here.
Yeah.
And his early work was like running, I know on group, he was running like workshops, like teaching basically teenagers, young men, just sort of basically mechanic stuff.
Right.
And that became a job, and then that sort of evolved into community work, and just varying, and then it slowly went into government stuff, policy, mostly around remote areas, communities, and everything like that.
Right.
And talking to him, he's passed away a few years ago now, but like when I would talk to him about like, you know, that sort of era, he did talk about sort of his kind of, you know, getting to Australia, you know, moving, going around, you know, looking, you know, just whatever, you know, looking through communities and everything, and just being sort of basically, like he would just say, in sort of shock at just how Aboriginal people are treated in Australia. He just said, it was like, this is horrible, like how this country treats its people.
Right.
And just the total kind of, you know, disrespect and just the attitudes, you know, the attitudes towards it and everything. So
right. And again, this is the context of late 70s, early 80s, or beginning.
Yeah. But that said, it's like that opinion, like
that didn't shift over the following.
It was never like, oh, it's all right now. Like, you know, not at all. It was just always, and I think that drove him professionally, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, and so I would say that's kind of whether there was initially an attraction to regional areas. I'm not sure. In my mum's case, I do know. So. My parents are from a farm, it's a very small place in Nigeria. Like, I always got to double check. Is it on Google Maps, you know?
Whoa, that's well.
So I think one point it wasn't, but now it is.
Okay.
But my mum actually moved to Lagos when she was, I think, 9. And that's sort of a big city.
Yeah.
And I know that since then, she's kind of a bit, you know, she lived there for, years. But I think after that, she was just like, I'm done with big cities.
Right.
Even though no city in Australia has that kind of intensity and density, I can still see even when, you know, she comes here to like visit in Brisbane, I can tell she does prefer, you know, would prefer not to live in a big city. So that I imagine was the appeal for her back then.
That's interesting. Though,
just, being in places where you can just, you know, just connect with people directly.
Yeah.
Just a sort of simpler, non-big city way. You know?
So it was a pioneer Nigerian migrant family, a pioneer family of multiculturalism in late 70s and early 80s.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning this notion of some kind of understanding of not many people like us.
Yeah.
How was that communicated to you as a kid, and like what was it like growing up with that?
I would say in terms of how it was communicated to me, I guess it was never directly communicated, but you always had like things where it's just an omnipresent kind of thing. And then, you know, things more sort of acute things happen when like so, you know, growing up in Dunn, I did run into like a good bunch of like very direct full-on racism, not the sort of subtle stuff, more the serious incident type stuff. Okay. So in those cases you're like, oh well, yeah, I get it now, like I'm different, you know. But
are you comfortable sharing like one of those?
Oh, yeah. Let me see. I would say probably one that sticks out is I'm like riding my bike home from school. I used to love riding around.
Yeah.
And, you know, occasionally as a kid, like, you know, whatever, a bunch of guys just like yell something out or, you know, just go back to it, whatever.
Yeah.
And I didn't even, by the time I was like 10, I was just like, whatever, you know, like, which is pretty messed up in the, you know.
Yeah.
in, that a 10-year-old is like, oh yeah, whatever, just a bunch of racists. Like, but probably a more extreme case was I'm crossing the road once and there's a car coming, but I've got plenty of time. And the car just like speeds up. And I'm like, I'm sort of walking my bike. And long story short, they tried to run me over. And like, I jumped out of the way of this car. And as they went by, they're yelling all sorts of stuff. And it's like, they would have actually hit me if I didn't jump out of the way.
Wow.
And I was probably 12, I reckon. And so, stuff like that, stuff like that definitely happened periodically.
Yeah.
Growing up, I would say frequency of incidents decreased over time, just as, stuff slowly gets a little bit better. But, yeah, so in terms of knowing or like, having it communicated that you're some sort of outsider or whatever.
Yeah.
Those were like the kind of acute reminders, I guess you'd say, but in a non-acute way, it was just like having things where like you couldn't relate to certain things, despite like where sort of, I guess, people that are, generations deep in Australia have just certain things that they know. One thing I always remember this because at the time, it wasn't really funny at the time, but it makes me laugh now, is being in primary school and watching The Castle.
Yeah, okay.
It's like various, and I remember like everyone at the school I was at the time, like it wasn't mega diverse.
Yeah.
And so at least in my class that I had, and
this is Darwin as well?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just this particular school. And everyone was like laughing. Like it was just, everyone understood what was going on. It was hilarious. And I remember I just did not get like any of it at all. I was just like, what is going, like Dan dug a hole? Like what is going on?
Right.
But I just didn't have the context for like the characters. But for all the other kids, they're like, oh yeah, I've got an uncle like that. Or
okay.
It was like a funny.
Right.
So that was just like I don't know why I remember that, but it was just this hilarious like thing where I'm just like, I've got absolutely no idea what's going on here.
Right. So the othering was like compounded.
Yeah.
Because of the,
it's not like anyone did anything in that scenario. It was just this sort of funny, like, like, I don't know, when you eat when you go to someone's place and eat like, I don't know, what's a bland meal? And you're just like, I've got no context for this sort of, these peas with no kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where you just like, I don't know what this is. It's it's not good or bad. It's just, yeah.
And so if you're 10 and perhaps younger and like brushing off, racist things being shouted at you on the road, how much of that are you taking back to your parents if you're already sort of got like such a thick jacket of armor on at a young age? Like, like that particular incident, did you take it home to your parents that you nearly got run down by someone? Like,
I'm not sure. I think I would probably take back like half, maybe.
Yeah.
Definitely not everything, but some for sure. Like if I was in a situation where like I didn't know what to do, I guess I'd ask my parents. But otherwise, not. Yeah, just some here and there, I guess. Yeah. If I didn't feel like if I felt like I needed some advice or something or some help or whatever, then for sure.
Yeah.
But otherwise, yeah.
And do you think it was the protective model migrant and sort of code switching ethos that inspired I'm going to get you the maths books for the next year because everyone doubts you and you need to be excellent? Like, is there do you think that's some of the...
Yeah, loosely,
Yeah.
at least. I think, and I would have conversations with my parents about that because, as a kid, you're just like, why am I doing, like,
Yeah.
what,
Everyone else is running around and playing, doing whatever.
Michael's not doing it. Like,
yeah. Michael gets to go to the show. Yeah.
So, I would just be like, what's this about? Like, or what's with the, like, sort of sternness of the whole thing. And, like, and my parents are sort of both very different. So it was cool having, like, I guess growing up, I liked having two parents with very different personalities. So I'd go to both of them for advice and, both get a different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So my dad, who was very direct, no subtlety, no sort of, just super direct. He was just like, okay, well, and he probably explained this to me at like varying levels of complexity as I got older. Like,
okay, yeah.
But eventually he was like, it's fairly simple. Your friends who just do whatever and mess around and whatever, when you get a little bit older, you'll find a lot of them, like, there's just a system already in place which will just look after them somehow. Like, you'll just find, your friend who was mucking around in class actually has like 7 generations of family wealth and owns a whole bunch of stuff, and it's just not going to matter.
Wow.
Whereas you, on the other hand, don't have that. So if you want to, like, you just can't afford to sort of do that. And he would tell that to me and my siblings, I guess, in some. But I guess when I was a little kid, I was like, why am I doing this, like, next year's work? He'd just be like simple. It's like, oh, because you need to work harder. And that's the thing you see in lots of sort of migrant families in terms of their approach, which makes sense fundamentally.
Yeah.
How it's delivered can vary. But I think that was sort of it in my case of how it was explained. Which sometimes I didn't really understand as a kid, but like, understanding of it grew, I guess. Yeah. And my dad was always just like, the general system is designed for some people, not necessarily everyone, not necessarily you. So
wow. And so he was distilling these ideas of generational wealth and white supremacy and inequity from a young age. Wow.
Yeah. And he was just like, it's like it works great for some because that's who it's designed for. But if you're not quite in that, then you might have to do some other things. And he wasn't really sort of doom and gloom about it either. It was just a very direct. It was just like
practical.
It's just like this is what it is. Right?
Wow. Right.
And it's kind of just like that's what I'm doing. Like it's kind of the
And was it a big family? Did you have many siblings or?
Yeah. So there was. Let me see. Growing up, it's actually funny. So,
okay, here it comes.
Initially, there was me and 3 of my sisters.
Okay.
Who are older than me.
Uh-huh.
And an older half sister moved to Australia when she was early 20s.
Okay.
And joined us.
Right.
So that was cool. So there's, how many is that? Like, that's 5 kids.
Yeah.
In total. Yeah.
Yeah.
And mostly living in, pretty sort of small, like, when I think back to, like, one of the main houses we lived in, I'm just like, that was pretty small.
Yeah.
Like, that was a pretty small house for a whole bunch of people. But, yeah.
Was it like a classic territory, 2-story, louvers kind of tropical house?
It was, tropical house. It was one of the 1-story, there's like sort of there's maybe sort of 5 designs up there for housing.
Right.
It was the kind of 1-story, reasonable block of like land.
So not raised up.
No, no, it wasn't one of the stilts ones. It was one of the ground level.
Okay.
You know, louvers everywhere.
Yeah.
They're all. I think it was actually an old housing commission design. It was one of the.
Okay.
Which a whole bunch of houses are like. You know, they were public housing that got sold. So the designs were sort of like, you know, drag and drop public housing kind of houses. I think prior to that, we lived in public housing, and so it's like, oh, familiar.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So pretty simple.
Right. So with your father distilling these ideas down to you as a kid, and already your mum is concerned about the sound of guitar coming from her, from your bedroom, based on familial journeys with that. Does your dad have the expectation that all this academic performance is going to lead to some kind of academic career? And what is his reflections when it isn't starting to not look like that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's it. Yeah. Okay. So, I think going through school, I remember like probably early-ish, maybe definitely by mid-high school, I'm losing interest in the sort of conventional school, like, you know, kind of school stuff. Like all through life, I always played sport and stuff. Like I went through a few different sports. By this time, I've, you know, taken up basketball and just loving that, and music as well, and not really being very interested in kind of anything else, really. Like, and I could see my parents start to become concerned. Like, you know, I could, because we'd communicate stuff. Like, and I was like, I can tell that to them they're just like, like, you know? They're like, but like oddly, like on the sports side of thing, from a really young age, actually, both my parents pushed that like on me as well, alongside
like a professional pathway towards.
Not so much actually pushing, but like from a very young age, they were like, you've actually got to do sport and be physically active. But it wasn't so much a pushy sport parent thing. It was more just, initially it was just like being physical is important. They didn't necessarily intend, you know, to like super pursue that. But that was always a thing that was like sort of pushed early on. Which, backtracking just to like super early years, it was also a funny thing. Like at the time, I think we moved to Darwin and playing soccer, which was cool because it was also like, you know, a lot of other kids just from, you know, varying migrant backgrounds, and lots of the coaching. Like there was one area where like coaching was pretty hardcore, but on like, you know, kids in like under 6 kind of stuff. Like,
wow.
To the point where I'm like looking back, I'm like, yeah, I don't think you can coach kids like that now. Like, I don't think.
Yeah.
Like, I remember doing like actual fitness training as a 5-year-old, not like have fun. Now it's all like, you know, have fun kids with like.
Wow.
This was like, you know, having like some coach sort of like, you know, moved to Australia from like, you know, Greece or Macedonia. It's just like, like, you know, like,
yeah.
and so on. But it was like, did set up a good foundation for like, you know, looking after yourself physically, I guess. But yeah, jumping back to what we're talking about with, you know, parents seeing, okay, is this kid like not doing the sort of things, especially as most of my older siblings were like, you know, very, very academic, like just like extreme sort of, you know, like where like, here's the scholarships, like that kind of level.
Right. Yeah.
So it came to me, it's like, there's this guitar happening. He's just training all the time. And I think I'm trying to remember some conversations. I remember thinking, oh no, like they're gonna be like angry with me, or like I remember getting to a point where I'm thinking, oh, they're probably just like really disappointed or just unhappy with this apparent pathway that I'm going down. And I remember having this chat with my dad, and that actually like wasn't the case. I was really surprised.
Right.
He was more like, yeah, look, I can see like your interests are developing that are sort of outside of, the sort of normal conventional things, and like maybe not really interested in those things.
Right.
And I was just like, yep.
That's correct.
Yeah. And he was just like, yeah, like, look, that's all right. But it was always about like, make sure you've got a few skills across it. That was his approach.
Like the fallback options.
Yeah,
Yeah.
essentially.
Should that fail or whatever.
Yeah. He was saying it's important not to just invest 1,000,000% into one skill.
Yeah.
So, play your guitar, but also think, what else can you do? Which and he was like, because, what if one day you can't play guitar? Like, what if you get amazing or whatever, but then one day, for whatever reason, you actually just can't do it?
Right, yeah.
And I kind of got looking at his general, like, just knowing that he was a mechanic, moved to Australia. I don't really know if anything specific happened, but I know that at some point after not long in Australia, he was just like, I don't want to be a mechanic. And went down an entirely different, like, just went down the academic pathway, which, just went to university, just studied. Then was just like, now I have a PhD and in management, and just, doing stuff that's like, I didn't even know he was a mechanic until I was like 17 or something, like when I'm learning to drive, and he was like, oh, I'll show you how a car works so that in case you break down. And it's just, and he showed me.
Let me bust out this secret career.
Yeah.
I've had.
And he didn't even tell me. It wasn't like, I used to be a mechanic. I was just thinking, how does he know any of this? What's... Yeah.
This is like how your Nigerian dad tells you he's a mechanic.
Yeah.
It's like when you're learning to drive at age 17.
Yeah.
And you discover he knows every single piece of the car and how to put it back together.
Yeah. But yeah, so I think that was like the rationale behind, saying you've got to have multiple plans or whatever so that you can do multiple things.
Yeah.
If you need to.
Which was not so common for that generation, those generations. Like it's almost commonplace today, but it's like a different, unusual kind of thinking for that time period.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think my mom was just kind of like a similar thing, just more about like, encouraging me to stay, I guess, balanced, just with other things, and keep things, have a variety of things going on and interests and whatnot. But on the whole, they weren't sort of like, oh no, our son's not becoming a lawyer or whatever, at all, really. And they ended up being like quite encouraging,
right,
I suppose, of,
okay,
going down a more creative pathway.
Right. And so growing up in like being academically talented but not engaged in those directions, and then finding a love and a passion and some sort of mystique around sound and music.
Yeah.
How did that play out, so to speak, for you? Like where you picked up a guitar and
Yeah. Initially, it was, I'm in early high school. Some of my friends are just like, we're learning, they were doing like guitar lessons that the school sort of ran or whatever. I was just like, I don't know. They're like, you should check it out or whatever. And I did, they had these like out of tune, like nylon string guitars, like, that every school
Classic,
has for
yeah.
like, you can get them for $80 or whatever. You can't actually tune them properly, whatever.
yeah.
And they showed me how to play, like, I don't even know, something. And I was just like, wow, this is fun. This is great. I'm going to learn how to do this thing. And so I started learning, was super into it. Broke my arm very badly about 3 weeks into learning guitar.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, playing footy.
Oh, right.
And like, I'd been practicing like all that time that happened. I actually was in hospital for like 2 weeks. Like,
Whoa.
totally messed up all the nerves in my hand. Like, had to relearn to use my hand.
Wow.
So I was like, well, that's a bit of a setback in the guitar department.
What age is that?
Considering I can't use my hand. 13.
13. And that's your dominant hand, is it?
It was my left, yeah. So, yeah.
Oh, the
Yeah, the one, yeah.
picking, no,
What,
fretting.
finger, yeah, fretting, yeah.
Fretting hand, yeah.
So then, I guess, came back to that after like a year of relearning to use my hand.
Whoa.
And then I was like, cool, this is fun. Enjoying it. Had some, horrible band, like just with my friends
yeah.
in school. And very quickly, I would, our band, like any high school band, sucked.
Yeah.
Actually, no.
What genre was it? In a rock direction, was it? Or?
Yeah, like it's high school. Like
Yeah.
these are boys in high school.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no one's talking about like.
Yeah.
I think we played. Oh, what do we play? I don't even think there were any original songs. I think it was just covers of like Metallica, probably.
Yeah.
Just whatever.
Yeah.
And I do remember actually there was a band at that school in like the year above us, and they had original songs and were good. And we always used to do these gigs where like they would get on, they would be like really awesome. And we would get on and like somehow it just sounded horrible. Like stuff broke, there was feedback. When you don't even know what feedback, you're just like, why is this happening? Anyway.
Yeah.
But very quickly, after playing in this band, for some reason, I just would be in the practice room and I'd be like, okay, aside from like this just sucking as a band, like aside from that,
Yeah.
this sounds horrible. And so I would just be like, this is just, I can't handle this. So, I would just learn how to sort of tweak everyone's amps and everything to sound less horrible. Because I like for some whatever that just affected me more. No, like my friends didn't seem to care. They were just happy, sort of slogging out riffs or whatever.
Right.
And I was like, we have to make this sound better. And then that sort of seemed to spread. Like other people who played guitar or whatever, anytime they were playing, they'd be like, hey, they'd call out to me like, can you help me like set this thing up and like,
Okay.
adjust the knobs on this amp or
Right.
whatever.
Right. Did you do anything to the drums to make it sound better at this stage?
At this stage, no.
More
I was more just like, why are you hitting them so hard? Like, what like it's not like
Classic high school drummer.
it's not better
Yeah,
if you hit
yeah.
the hi-hat. It's just worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
But even though like drums were my first, before I like started learning guitar, like as a younger kid, they were probably the first drums and percussion. That was the first thing I was interested in sonically.
Right.
Where I would listen to recordings which growing up, despite like, my parents not being actual musicians, although, yeah, actually, no, they do, they did sing and stuff, and my mum was in a choir and whatever.
Right.
But we did always have music on, and a variety of music, like just from, whatever was popular, like here at the day, to like, all the music from Nigeria and everything. So they were the first instruments like where I'd listen to and be like, what is that? How would I recreate it? Like how would I hit it to make that sound?
Yeah.
But at that point, I didn't really know what to do with like any sort of drums other than, I can still remember the first time hearing an acoustic, like a drum set in real life. Like one of my friends, he got like I don't know, what PDP or one of those, ultra low end drum sets.
Yeah.
And I was like really excited to sort of hear this thing, which I like at this point I'm listening to so many recordings and everything. And he starts playing. I'm just like, that sounds nothing like, I was like, this is just this horrible, like flabby sound.
Yeah. Sounds nothing like the produced drum kit sounds I'm used to hearing on records.
Yeah. All I can hear is hi-hat, like just like bashing this thing. So, slowly, that was where I guess I began sort of thinking about sound and trying to make it better. I guess it was born out of being in, just being in the band situation, being like, this sucks, this is horrible.
Yeah.
And then later in high school, starting to like record, I guess, in varying ways. Like I'd changed schools, and the next school I went to actually there were some people there that played that were fairly good. I guess there was more people. It was a bigger school. There was just more people, who were playing like reasonably good.
Yeah.
And yeah, started thinking more like recording things. I got some software. Do
you remember what was the first?
Yeah. N-Track Studio.
Wow, I've never heard of that.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. It was a fully featured, like, multi-track,
Okay.
Like any Reaper or Pro Tools or whatever. Like,
Right.
You could record and overdub and probably program drums and whatever. So I had that. I also had a little portable recorder that recorded onto cassette and had this add-on like stereo mic, which I've still got. It's like
a little plug-in like T-shaped one?
Yeah, like a little, I think it was a Sony thing.
Yeah.
I don't know how I bought it. Like, anyway.
Yeah. Don't incriminate yourself.
Yeah, I definitely purchased this. It's like, I didn't have any money. How did I get, anyway. This is Darwin. This is, Anyway, and I used to take that to parties and stuff and just like record, people sort of jamming, like me and my friends, and like listen back to that. And that was sort of fun, particularly because it was like a decent stereo mic, like the recordings were a fairly good representation of just whatever was in front of them. But then, starting to think, okay, like I was writing music, and then you start to think, okay, how can I overdub a second part or whatever? And then the same thought, that I'd have earlier on playing in the bands would be like, I'd do this thing, I've written this song, I've recorded bits, I'm overdubbing, and I'd be like, wow, that sucks. What's how can this not suck? Like this sounds so much worse than anything I'm listening to. So
in terms of like production standard, how it's recorded, like that sort of thing, like
yeah, just the sound, everything.
Yeah.
And at this point, like by this time, I've got pretty good technical facility on guitar, at least. Like I'm, for that point, I guess, in this whole thing, I'm a comfortable musician. Like I can play across a number of styles and, you know, have good technique and whatever. But I was just like, this sucks. Like the sound of this is just not there.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, you know, drove, or I say drove, but is a continual driver of just, you know, trying to push things forward in terms of my own skills with sound, at least. Yeah.
So you're kind of becoming like a guitar and bass tech to your peers in high school there, and then you're starting to record yourself, and it's still not quite sounding right. You've already got your guitar and bass friends asking them to come and tweak the settings and whatnot.
Yeah.
At which point do you start recording for other people, or do you just record your own bands and projects for a while?
Let me see. On, I think, wrapping up high school, I'd really just recorded, like, in high school, be like myself and or stuff with friends. And I had like lots of like, you know, because I was interested in, like, I'd always be writing, you know, just random music and stuff as well. So I'd record that. Wasn't a lot of like other people until I think, so after school I took a year off and was just, what was I doing? Working, playing a lot of, you know, just practicing a whole bunch as well.
Yeah.
And the next year I started university. And that was probably where I started, like, you know, recording other people.
Okay. Right.
I remember, I think the first...
And what's the course there that you're in?
I was doing a Bachelor of Music Technology. Yeah, just down at South Bank in the conservatorium there.
Right.
And that was great because, you know, now I've got recording studio access and just making friends with everyone around me who's a musician.
Yeah.
And, you know, wants their stuff recorded for free.
Yeah.
And I call, like, you know, and I was like learning more and more and more and just trying to get better at it. And outside of university, I'd also like, you know, just record some stuff. I remember probably the first like thing that I recorded that was like I guess an EP or, you know, like a distinct sort of, this is the thing we did.
Yeah.
So it was actually a guy from in early high school when I was in a band and I was talking about how there was another band at school that was like good. And then, you know, they'd play.
Yeah.
So the singer from that band actually, he'd moved down here to Brisbane as well.
Right.
From Darwin.
Okay.
And he was doing like singer-songwritery stuff. And I was living in this share house, Queenslander kind of thing. And so, you know, we recorded a kind of 4-track thing then. And it's really funny because we put so many hours into it. Like, you know, he'd come over sort of evenings for like, has to have been months.
Recording in your share house? Or
Yeah. Just in my, I think I had, you know, in my bedroom, I just had my PC set up. I had like a Rode NT5. No, I had 2 Rode NT5s. This is like, I was in the big league here.
Yeah.
And that was like the vocal mic. It was the, you know, everything was a Rode NT5. Everything got mic'd with that.
Okay.
And into like Cubase, and we arranged it all as well. Like we programmed drums and, you know, wrote like I think probably the worst string parts I'll ever write. 'Cause I didn't know what, you know.
Yeah.
But, and so that was probably the first sort of thing I sort of recorded for someone, like just like an artist being like, I want to record, and like starting from scratch, like here's my songs, just, they don't have any other instruments yet or whatever. And it was every now and then, because I've still got the actual CD, every like few years, I just put it on and listen to it as like a sort of benchmark of like thinking, okay, that's where I was at one point in time. It's not even that bad.
Right.
It's actually just really funny to listen to because I didn't really know much about EQ and whatnot then. Like I was very early learning, and I had this one plugin. It was the BBE Sonic Maximiser plugin. And it was one of those, like, it sounds impressive, like, when you put it on.
So you put on everything?
I just put on everything, like, I can't remember. It just had, like, 2 or 3 knobs.
I want to maximize everything.
Yeah. It's like, who doesn't, I mean, why would you not, like, who's out here minimizing? Like, Sonic Maximizer. You want the Sonics maxed. It's simple. It had 2 knobs. It was like, I can't remember. They were like Excite and like, probably, I don't know, Inferno or something. I can't even remember. But that just went on everything.
Nice.
Like, vocals, yep. Guitars, yep. Violins, yep. And so, like, listening back to it, it's got this really funny, like, ultra bright, weird forward sound.
Right.
But at the same time, it's kind of like, that was a moment in time. It's like a photo.
Yeah.
A very particular one.
Yeah.
Of just, that's what I was doing then. So, yeah, that was the probably first sort of thing. Then, beginning uni and going through that, I was doing a lot of it. Then I prioritized, when I was studying, you had to have, I can't even remember you did all these different subjects and you had to have your major study portfolio of recordings. I also did composition and performance electives and whatnot as well. But I prioritized just meeting and talking to people that was studying in the same building that I was, and doing a lot of recording. That was because you're sort of meant to do like these big projects, and I did do those as well, but I also just made sure I was just recording all the time as much as I could, like anything.
Yeah, just getting points on the board.
Yeah, I just had my hand up for anything, and just made sure I just, spoke to as many people as I could, made as many friends as I could, and just got as much experience out of it, because I was like, all right, I'm just here, doing a degree for a few years. Might as well just, even though there's like hex or help or whatever, when you actually like look at how much a degree costs, sure, you're paying it later.
Yeah.
But I remember like looking at some breakdowns of like how much you're paying per hour or, to study.
Right.
And so I remember just like, I'm getting bang for buck on this.
Yeah.
Yes. I'm using these facilities.
Isn't that a great flipping of the kind of typical uni student ethos, right? Like that is like, maybe it's shifting now with more awareness around it, but like thinking on my time in uni, like I maybe like that at some points, but yeah, what a great approach.
Yeah. And I remember just thinking, I'm milking the resources to like, even things like, I remember like our library, it was functioned like a conventional library, but there was also just this sort of hidden like DVD section. This is in the era of DVDs.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I'm not paying that $2 down at Network Video. Like, I'm getting DVDs.
I used to go in and rip the CDs from the library.
Yeah. So yeah, recording. And then by sort of later in the degree, and I was also playing and for lots of different things through this whole time as well. and by later in the degree, like I'm more finding like here and there, like lecturers are asking me to record some, like, you know, requesting like if I can be on a particular project or whatever, or just friends and stuff being like, oh, can we get him to record it? Just from having, you know, doing as much as I could. Yeah, and just having it sort of spill on from there. I guess those years studying were like pretty instrumental just in terms of doing so much and also having the time to just practice, like be it instrumental practice and ear training, lots of just, you know, probably haven't spent as much time ear training, you know, since doing that really. Yeah.
Even though it's music technology, you still got a fair bit of performance time.
Yeah,
in there.
I elected to. Yeah. Because I always saw it as like, there's not a lot of, I think I identified early, like for working with, it was my opinion, I suppose, working with music. If you're going to be engineering music, it's probably tougher if you can't, or if you're not, if you don't have the facility, like to sort of deal with the musical side of things.
Yeah.
Because I, you know, sort of later find that, you know, when you're trying to make good recordings, the number one obstacle to that is, like, I'm just going to be blunt. The number one obstacle I find in most scenarios is that bands suck. That's the, like, not like, not suck, but
you're like trying to find the right plug-in, or this sound's not right, or this mic technique's not right, but when it comes down to it.
Yeah, it's like really, it just needed better parts, better chord voicings, better whatever, like just better stuff on the musical end.
Right.
So I kind of like tried to get as much facility, ability, and knowledge as possible with playing, arranging music, music theory, whatever, like just all of that.
Right. Yeah, so like beyond the audio engineer sphere and more into the producer, technically the producer sphere. Yeah.
Because I think that they like are sort of inseparable.
Yeah.
They'll both benefit each other. And you can make your job easier if you're engineering, if you can just, you know, nudge things in a musical direction so you don't have to think, oh, how am I going to EQ this keyboard out of the way, you know, like of this guitar or whatever, when it simply isn't an issue to begin with, I guess.
Right.
Yeah. So that was I guess that was a driver in terms of, and I just enjoy, you know, playing music. And, you know, like I was throwing myself into all different recording situations, but also throwing myself into different bands and just whatever as well.
Right.
For fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so Niyi's top tips for musicians about to hit the studio or start recording is, number one, don't suck. What are some other?
That sounds bad. I mean, that's, you know, that sounds like I think people suck. People are great.
I guess start with good music. Start with good composition, good parts.
Yeah, like I think the more like practice is just awesome. It just works. If you can practice, not so much like before a specific thing, but just as an ongoing thing, as in anything really.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
like it really just works. And yeah, practice and learning are just these amazing things. Your brain is just like, all right, cool information.
Yeah.
Now I can do that thing.
Yeah.
I guess, yeah, that always makes recording easier, essentially. Yeah, and practicing with intent, like sort of say, you know, just a hypothetical example. you're a real example. You're a keyboard player. You know, you're practicing, and you know most people get to the point where they're good and professional and can really play, but might not have practiced the kinds of things you might need to do in a recording setting, or really thought about that. In terms of like how you fit into a broader picture of a, you know, final sonic product or thing or whatever.
Right.
Yeah, and just like intently practicing those sorts of things.
Is there merit in doing like a pre-production arrangement in garage band or whatever you can so you sort of get your head in that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's probably
because it's so accessible for those levels. And if you're wanting to work with an engineer, you're recognizing that you want to take it a bit further, but it still helps to go through that process and go through those motions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one thing, like, I'm always encouraging, like, the more of that can be done, the better, I find. Because you can just hear it back and be like, oh, I didn't realize that actually this, you know, could be better if I just did this way. And it also helps when, like, I think to not do that, and, you know, there are times where, like, that doesn't, and styles of music where that isn't necessarily what needs to happen. Like, if you're, like, a jazz trio, you're probably not really needing to do sort of a whole bunch of, you know, phases of demoing stuff.
Right, when you have something that's more tracked live,
yeah,
there's less of...
Yeah, there's an expected sort of sound. You know how to do it.
Yeah.
But for a lot of other things, the more stages of demo things go through, the better. Like, I've done projects before where before the actual real sessions, there's been a few demos, and like the final demo, I've done stuff where like the final demo is actually pretty good. Like, you wouldn't release it quite, but it's like, oh, we can really hear the finished thing.
Right.
And even taking stuff from that demo into the like just
pulling. Okay. Right. That's almost like in the film world where we pull references and things.
Yeah.
Because if we can quickly pull some references together, then we can get that much close, like, you know, 80% close to what that vision is.
Yeah.
And then we can help the client or the project get there, right? And in a similar fashion, I guess you would also have references or reference mixes.
Yeah.
But beyond that, doing a demo, having all those layers and stems, being able to pull apart parts before you get into the, I guess, costly part of studio time and hiring an engineer that you've done a lot of the groundwork yourself, kind of on your own time, will lead to like a much better product. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, you know, not doing that can also work as well.
Right.
But in a lot of scenarios, and particularly now where many people have some access to some sort of recording.
Yeah.
You know, you've got stuff that's free, like Reaper and, you know, and...
Yeah. Please use Reaper and not Audacity. Please. Talk to me later.
Valid, yeah.
Use whatever works, but yeah.
And there's, on the extreme end, like I've done some things which are on the extreme end where like I was saying, like things from the demo actually make it. And even things like, I've done this a couple of times with things that are guitar based, using, you know, virtual amplifiers.
Yeah.
But dialing in a tone, like, you know, dialing in a sound, then in the actual recording, hiring that amplifier and just literally setting the knobs how I did in the software version.
Oh, so you're okay.
Because I pulled this sound with a digital model of it.
Right.
That's generally it. I'm going to go and hire the real thing. do the same thing.
Okay.
And that has worked very well.
Right.
Now, like in the guitar thing, like a lot of the digital stuff is actually good enough just to use.
Yeah.
For many things.
Yeah.
But like that's, and you can even drum tuning and selection that can happen. You can just program up a demo and just be like, okay, I'm going to whatever,
tune it to that.
Yeah. And use this kind of drum and be like, okay, that sounds, you can try out different things. This is for like acoustic recordings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that's the extreme end of what you can do, I think, before going to a studio.
Yeah.
Because then you've got a framework and you can still change that. It's not like you're stuck in this box or anything, but it's like then you can still be like, oh, now we've got cool ideas or whatever.
Right. Okay. So we met working in broadcast at a radio station, and I have wanted to come have you here for a chat for a while, but I refused to until I had these microphones matched. And that is because I'm a big fan of like how your voice sounds, and I wanted to capture it and convey it in a certain way. And I was lucky enough to get my hands on one of my dream microphones when I started this podcast, and then recently managed to balance them up.
Nice.
So I have two of these, the Electro Voice RE20s for the tech folks out there.
Yeah.
I am interested in this idea of underrepresented excellence being hidden in plain sight. And black and brown voices perhaps not being received or seen for what they are. Now, you have worked in broadcast and for several radio stations, not just the one that we work on. What are the have producers like pulled you into a room and say, hey, can you read this thing for me? Or have you thought about being a presenter? Or like, what are the kind of like industry responses that you've had to your voice working in these spaces?
Yeah. Thank you, by the way. Pretty good. And like, I've done lots of voiceover things.
Okay.
Which, initially sort of happened circumstantially.
Right.
Of just, working in radio and voicing like a promo for something.
Yeah.
In a rush, but then it being like, oh, can you actually do the rest of, like,
yeah,
like that sort of thing,
right?
And I enjoy it. It's something I do, like, sometimes fairly frequently.
Okay,
mostly here and there, like, where for certain things, where I'm like, okay, yeah, my voice would be ideal for that.
Like projects that you're working on that you...
Yeah.
Okay, right.
Yeah. And yeah, sometimes people just request, like, can you do this thing?
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Right.
And yeah, I enjoy it, particularly because as an engineer, I can also just do it and deliver like an end product.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like that's not a, that's just a fine, easy thing.
Yeah.
And I enjoy just working with the voice generally. Like it's whether it's my voice or someone else's voice.
Yeah.
And that's just across voiceovers, singing, whatever. I really just enjoy listening to people's voices and working with them somehow. So yeah, generally it's been pretty good in that. Mostly like the stuff I end up doing is you sort of straight, like, authoritative, like, like male, like,
can you just
information?
Give me a fake example.
Like, I don't know. Like, well, a good example, I don't know how this one happened, but there was renovations to one of the train stations in Melbourne, and buses had replaced trains, and like there's a voice that comes out if you go to the train station.
Okay. And
so yeah, I got the gig as the voice that plays out of the speaker. That's just like Fitzroy Station is whatever. Like,
come on, you got to give me a bit more than that.
It's undergoing repairs. Passengers for Brunswick, there are, there are buses will replace trains from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. weekdays.
Okay, so these kinds of gigs.
Yeah.
But have you any interest in like being a presenter, or have you guested on shows? Like what about that level of?
I've had people like talk to me about it, and I'm like, I don't know if I can think quickly enough to like sometimes when I am like working with presenters and just. I mean, I'm not ruling it out, but
even with seeing what we see about how producers work and the scripts and all of that sort of safety net that is there for presenters, you still feel that maybe, I mean, not to devalue the skill, that there is incredible skill that presenters have of being able to keep sound on the air, avoid dead air, and not just avoid dead air, but like do it with great skill. But it has been interesting to me, particularly in the last year or so, learning the radio techniques of how the producers work and that sort of thing. But yeah, that said, still it's a bit unsure. Or
yeah, I think it's okay. I'm not going to rule it out. It's definitely something where I'm like, okay, that's like I draw a circle of my comfort zone. I'm like, oh, that's sitting on the outer border of that.
Yeah,
I just feel like I would just run out of stuff. I just like, well, thanks for joining us. I was still here after that 4 seconds of silence.
You start reading out the stops on the Frankston line.
Yeah. Who wants to hear something I did? I did earlier. So yeah, I don't know. At the time of this conversation, presenting, etc. Unknown. One of my siblings has done a bunch of presenting,
right?
And she's like mega extroverted.
Okay.
So I'm like, maybe, yeah, it's a maybe.
Right. And is this familiar for you? Have you been asked to guest on sessions or shows much?
A few times, yeah. Usually, I think, and that's gone like in mixed ways. I did one once, which was just like, where like you want something scrubbed from the internet, and like, you can't even. It's an interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just didn't.
Yeah. I do have some of those. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's out there somewhere. You won't find it, hopefully. I tried looking for it the other day to see like how easily can this be found. And I was like, okay, it can be found, but you'd have to go looking. Anyway, not good. And occasionally, like I've been like, like randomly roped into something. And actually, just recently, I offered my opinions and perspective on a radio show, but I'm anonymous, like as in I don't have a name. You'd have to know what I sound like.
Yeah.
Which, granted, there are people who like it's there are people who it's not so easy. But well, that wasn't me. Like, but it was a very funny subject matter where I was like, I'm going to stay anonymous on this one.
Right.
Yeah. So occasionally, but I don't think I'm like, I think I'd have to work on sort of, talking in a wider variety of situations, perhaps. Yeah.
Right. To get more comfort in that
yeah.
kind of space. Right.
Yeah. And I think when I do it, it is it's out of like just having witnessed like what not to do. Like, when you sort of work in broadcast and seeing guests come on that are just obviously really nervous and whatever. But if you're as like an audio operator and stuff, I can be like, well, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm not going to be that bad.
You collect up all the bad characters.
Yeah, like, so, you just learn those things like don't talk off the microphone. And, you pick up those and ends up being hopefully okay.
Yeah, I did enjoy not having to do the microphone technique reminder today. But this one will not be scrubbed from the internet. But I want to thank you for joining us today, Niyi.
Oh, thanks for having me.